Being grounded. Yeah, a little bit. It wasn't that intense though. It was kind of like stay in your room.
More!
Lunch break!
From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to help you build your beautiful online presence for you and your business.
Whoa! Welcome back to another episode of Lunch Break.
This is my first live lunch break. I did a Zoom lunch break.
That's right.
About a year and a half ago. Back in person.
Yeah, same. Also, during the pandemic apocalypse.
Right.
Zoom.
Before we start, I gotta give a big shout out to our plus one today, Lydia, who requested Korean food. Ooh.
Thank you, Lydia.
Thanks,
you,
Lydia.
I love it.
That's me. I'm Korean.
That's right. You're Korean. You're
I'm half Korean, and the other half is Chinese, like this Chan man over here.
That's correct.
Mike is all of us put together.
Oh, that's true. If we had a baby. But that's not all that we share. We also are known in our group to be the more Americanized bunch of the crew.
The Twinkies,
The Twinkies.
the bananas,
All the yellow and
all
white
the yellow and white
fruits.
things.
Yeah. As Mike and I would call it, in-betweeners, because we made a short about our shared experience as multi-generational Asian Americans. And then Dan, you made a whole documentary being an adoptee. And we have a lot of conversations about this, but we never had a conversation on lunch break about it.
Yeah, you're coming into our conversation inner circle, so welcome.
Why does it matter that we're like more Americanized? What makes us think that that's something that we need to like think about?
Right? Why does it matter? Why does it matter?
I don't think it matters. I mean, there's a lot of different opinions, and I think we felt that growing up too. I've definitely felt that, being like feeling an outsider because of being more Americanized. But I actually do think that as an Asian American community overall, we are on this spectrum of being Americanized and a certain type of duality and dual identity when it comes to being American and our homeland.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I don't think we realized one day, oh, it matters. I think it was kind of like, well, for me anyway, it was thrust upon me. I feel like it was the same thing
Thrust
with you.
upon you.
Where like someone pointed it out, and then we were like, oh, I am a different person within a different community. Like, oh, I didn't realize I was. Do you remember your first instances where someone was like, oh, you're a different type of Asian, by the way?
I didn't know that this was a term, but in the adoptee community, it's called coming from out of the fog. When the fog is revealed or the fog is there and then you're coming from out of it, that's the moment where you decide that you're not actually who you think you are. You're not like a white person in an Asian body. You're like an actual Asian person.
Oh,
and so for a
interesting.
lot of adoptees, they have this moment where up until then, they consider other Asians to be theys, or like they just feel so much different. But then there's a moment where they come to a realization, no, this is me. This is who I am. I'm also Asian. This is part of my culture. And then all of that's kind of, the fog is lifted.
Oh man, I didn't know that there was like actual analogy that you guys
Yeah.
talked about.
But yeah, when was your...
The fog.
I think it was like gradual, just growing up on the playground and stuff like that. It would be signs that like maybe my upbringing in my household was different than some Asian kids in my classes and stuff, whether it be like the fact that I didn't speak Chinese, you know, and my parents' names were like American names. That kind of blew a lot of like Asian classmates' minds. That was so reoccurring that I was like, okay, like, yeah, I'm very different when it comes to my Asian identity compared to these other people in my class. Sometimes it'd be at the expense of jokes too. Yeah, it wasn't like one distinct moment.
It's funny you mentioned jokes because I feel like it's all with jokes too. I think actually a harmful thing that happened was jokes like that I was getting as a kid. Oh, you're not like that Asian. The non-Asian person said it to me as if it was a good thing. Like, oh, you're like us, you know? So as a kid, you're like, oh, cool. I'm accepted in like the majority. I'm not a minority.
Right.
I'm like, cool kid like you. So then you get almost like reverse engineered into the fog where you're like, yeah. I'm a different type of Asian or whatever. As a kid, you don't know those harmful stereotypes, but growing up, you're like, wait, why was I putting down my Asianness? Or there was no need to reject that. That was just the man making me feel bad about something, you know?
You know, I totally relate to that. Yeah. So you had a lot of like Caucasian or non-Asian friends growing up, and I was the same way. And I think that's also kind of why maybe I was like not aware of how different I was as an Asian for a little bit. It was gradual. Did you grow up with a lot of primarily non-Asian friends?
I think I grew up with primarily non-Asian friends up until high school, and then I think that it just comes with growing, and then you realize that you feel a little bit different, you look a little bit different, and that forces you to have to find other Asian friends or things that reflect your experience. And so, especially for me, like I didn't have Asian parents either, and so because of that, I think that I really wanted to try to make myself more connected to the community. What a superpower, though! I like to think that because we have to go through some of these experiences, turns us into who we are, and it's so cool that we get to be between both of these worlds. In between.
On Mike's point about like, sometimes it felt like we were like rejecting our Asianness too. I felt that too. Like sometimes I'd be like, oh, maybe me hanging out with non-Asian friends and stuff, not being associated with them as strongly was breaking a stereotype. And like, it's like, oh yeah, I just blew some of these white kids' minds that like, I don't eat all these things every meal, you know, back at home, and I don't speak Chinese back at home and stuff like that, and like all these very American things. I was like, okay, maybe this is a good thing for the Asian community. But I think I did at some point also realize that I was almost rejecting my roots in a lot of ways too by doing that.
By you existing, you were being progressive for non-Asian people,
Right.
as their only Asian representation.
Yeah.
Whenever you defy the stereotype, it makes you feel good because you're like, wait, I'm like opening up their eyes to something that they didn't see before. Like I remember I did a movie in the South, right? And they were all hanging out with me, and then they knew I had a girlfriend at the time. A picture of me and my girlfriend came up, and my girlfriend is white. You saw in their eyes, they were like, oh! Like they, like I was like, oh, they assumed that she wasn't white. And that's a stereotype, right? You have like this like weird impulse like, oh, cool, I proved them wrong. I proved that stereotype wrong. But then at the same time, you're like, oh, but like, is that putting down Asianness? Or like am I separating myself from this Asianness, you know?
Right. You're third generation
Third
Asian.
generation Asian. My great-grandfather came to America.
Yeah, I'm fourth generation Asian American. My great-great-grandfather.
But anyway, so growing up, I wasn't raised on this type of food. I was raised on like spaghetti and meatballs, pizza, not Asian food. So whenever the, I guess, Asian kids in school brought like kimbap and like kimchi, fun Asian foods that the non-Asian kids made fun of, I always actually embraced it. I was like, you know, this is good. Like, I don't know why these guys are making fun of it. Like, this is what's it called, bulgogi? I'm gonna have some more of this.
Reverse lunchbox moment.
Like, I would trade my ham sandwiches that I brought, sorry mom, for the kimbap.
Yeah, like at home for dinner, I had a lot of American food for sure. My parents didn't cook a lot of like traditional Chinese dishes or anything like that. Only on like when we went out to restaurants and stuff. That's when I would get a taste of like Chinese food and Asian food.
What did Mrs. Chan,
Oh yeah.
what did Marcia cook?
Well, like the fact that I had like Taco Tuesdays at home was like a very weird thing for some Asian friends of mine. We're like, wow, you do that? That's like such a white thing. The fact that like my parents would make meatloaf every once in a while is like a very weird thing.
I had meatloaf all the time.
Concept of meatloaf is weird.
We should talk about the things that our Asian friends have said, like, oh, that's so white.
Yeah,
that we grew
ton
up
of
with.
things.
They're like, wait, at your birthday party, did you have characters at your birthday party?
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh yeah, I had the Red Ranger at one of my birthday parties. And they're like, that is so white.
Oh my God.
I was like, wait, what? That is?
I had Power Rangers at my birthday too.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that we were talking one time, and it sounded like the Boy Scouts were.
Is that true?
More of a non-Asian thing.
Dan and I were in Boy Scouts. We got to Eagle, hey. You know, there was though like an Asian troop in my neighborhood.
It's because it is good for college apps. You know what I mean? And like a lot of parents put their kids in Boy Scouts because they know that it'll help them. Or maybe early on it was a non-Asian thing, but I think more Asians are doing it these days and stuff.
Boy Scouts, though.
Boy Scouts.
Did your Asian friends do like community sports? Did they do like soccer? AYSL?
A lot, very
Yeah,
specific
AYSL.
sports. They would do like
I did-
golf and tennis. All my Asian friends.
I did Little League. I don't know if that is.
No, I mean,
We should have had an Asian friend here
Oh, yeah,
to be
yeah.
like, all right.
for me, to this day, it's like music taste. Sometimes I'll be
wow.
like, oh, you know, Tom Petty, like I know that song. Yeah, I know that
More the-
Chicago song or something like that, you know?
More of the classic rock songs were
Right.
songs that we grew up with.
Yeah, my parents like had a very specific taste in American music because they also are multi-generational. They have, I guess, a wider Western music taste
Yeah.
that like they would listen to when I was a kid, and so I adopted a lot of that. Some of it's just musicals, like loving certain musicals and knowing certain musicals was labeled like, oh, that's such an American, that's a white thing. Yeah.
Oh, another thing actually, like we're at a party, and then my friend's iPod was playing, and then there was like ABBA songs, and I'm like, yeah, ABBA, and then they were just like, you're so white, Mike.
That's the thing, like ABBA, like a lot of Asians like ABBA, like Filipinos love ABBA. There's like moments where I'm like, oh man, like I don't know if you're quick to put me in a box where it's like I have this taste and this preferences because I'm whitewashed or something like that, when it might be something completely different.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I always thought that it was kind of a treat, though, on the other side to get a little bit of the Asian culture. So I had a friend that was Filipino, and he had Magic Mike. And stereotypically, a lot of Filipino families had Magic Mike, which is karaoke at home.
Well, I don't
And
know what
so
that is,
that was a really special thing for me when I went to his home. I was like, oh, this is like something fun that I had never like gotten to experience, but it was so a part of growing up as a Filipino American. So it was really cool being able to experience some of those things at a younger age and kind of biting off a little bit where I could.
Was your guys' house a shoes off necessary household, or what? How was that?
Oh, that's a good question.
My household was shoes on. You could do shoes on.
Shoes on, yeah.
Yeah, same, shoes on. And then meanwhile, I've had friends in our circle were even in hotel rooms. I accidentally came in with my shoes, and then they were like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that this rule was in hotel rooms.
Yeah.
That's something that actually I think you should apply to all homes.
Yeah.
It's a sanitary thing, realizing.
It makes sense, for sure.
It so makes sense.
Did your parents ground you and have allowances?
I had an allowance. It's like I got allowance. I remember like people making comments about that actually. But like all my Chinese friends had huge payouts at Chinese New Year.
Yeah.
Right. No, right. So, yeah, so
And I
think
was all like, well, it evens out. Being grounded. Yeah, a little bit. It wasn't that intense though. It was kind of like stay in your room. That was my grounded.
yeah.
I don't know.
Vacation.
Let's take a quick break to thank Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. As you know, we make a lot of videos here at Wongfu Productions. The Video Blocks feature allows us to showcase and highlight our videos exactly how we want. There's no need to spend extra time learning how to code a website. The templates that Squarespace offers are super clean and elegant, and they work seamlessly with any device. To learn more about other features, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready, make sure to use our code WONGFU to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain name. And the links are also in the description below. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Let's talk about like dating. Because I think like I've talked to like you guys on the side a lot, and you mentioned having a non-Asian girlfriend. But like I remember growing up and being known to be like whitewashed through a lot of like friends, and a lot of like my Asian peers would be like, oh, I would assume you liked white girls. I'm just kind of curious like how being more Americanized and stuff has like played into your dating preferences.
I think from, not me specifically, but just as a broad call out.
Yeah.
When you grow up, especially when we grew up, and the movies and the TV shows were blonde women, brunettes, mainly white as the people that were attractive. And you see that all the time.
Right.
You're just like, oh yeah, I guess that's what beauty is.
Yeah.
And so that's what you naturally became attracted to. And so that's why I think that the generation now, because you just have so much more diversity, that people don't think about it as hard. But I think that we definitely thought about that. And I know that I thought about that, which is why I probably, up until I met more Asian American people, that I was just like, oh yeah, of course, it's just like, this is who to date.
Right. The same. Well, what about you?
Beauty is a construct created by childhood influences, experiences, and role models. Sherlock.
Oh, Sherlock.
That was my favorite Sherlock.
There should be like a meter of like white things we've said. The fact that you said a Sherlock quote is pretty fucking funny.
We were raised on American TV, and I guess a lot of the first gen Asians were like raised with the Asian channels growing up, right? So they were exposed to like K-dramas and K-pop and all that stuff. And I actually have never seen a K-drama before. So yeah, watching these like the Disney Channel and white TV shows, you're like, oh, okay, so those are what the Prince Charmings and the princesses and Disney princesses should look like. But yeah, it's so interesting because my mom, who again, she was born in America, she only recently watched her first K-dramas during COVID because she was taking care of her mom. And then she was talking to me and she's like, oh my God, like I feel like my eyes have been opened up because she was seeing all of these good-looking, attractive Asian male romantic interests. Growing up, my mom actually dated only non-Asians until my dad, I think.
Oh,
or
yeah.
definitely more non-Asians. Also, there were less Asians back in the
Right,
70s,
right.
but it's basically telling like it opened her eyes like, oh wow, if I saw this as a younger, girl, this would have totally changed my perception of like, oh wow, seeing like these Asian guys as like romantic interests,
Yeah. Mhm.
So it's crazy, and you can see why, with the rise of like K-pop and stuff, and the rise of K-dramas, like that's influencing
BTS is
culture.
changing lives.
Yeah.
Changing lives.
A mentor of mine mentioned, she's got teenage boys now, and mentioned that one of her teenage boys was dating somebody that wasn't Asian, and she's got their Korean kids. His girlfriend, who's non-Asian, is like really kind of fetishizing the Korean kid because of what she sees, because of BTS and all of these different things. Her and her husband were talking about like, oh, should we say something to our son? And the father was like, don't say anything to our son. This is great. Let her
Oh my
fetishize
God.
our son all that she wants. If
Oh,
I had
man.
this growing up.
That's dangerous.
Yeah,
But
but funny story
It is
though,
funny.
of the opposites.
look how the tables have turned.
of how the opposites
Yeah.
went.
Now that we have to make our lives even more complicated, like, do you like me or am I a fetish?
Do you like because of K-pop? I think I have friends on dating apps and stuff. When they get matches and stuff, from non-Asians, they'll like kind of look through the photos and see if they're like really into anime or like really into K-pop, because like there could be a lot of tells of like, okay, maybe you're just like fascinated with the culture.
So basically, if someone has a fetish and they try to date any of us, they'll be really disappointed because they're like, so K-dramas, and then we're like,
Sometimes I felt that way actually, like growing up and like having interest in like an Asian girl, like being like, oh my God, maybe they're gonna like get to know me and realize that we don't have that much in common besides the way we look. And that was like a big insecurity, even like going into having interest in like Asian women and stuff like that.
You're dating somebody now, and so do you find that you don't really need to, it seems like you guys just get along.
Yeah.
That's the
like-
most important thing.
Yeah, we have a lot of similar like personality traits, some sense of humor, and we drive well. And but at the same time, I also won't reject the fact that like we have a connection just based on our Asian American identity.
And with where you're currently at with it too.
Yeah, in terms of just our tastes and preferences and stuff like that, and our view of the world through that lens. It took me a while to come around to realizing that that's what I'm looking for is. Because I even wrestled with this idea, like, should I be only liking white women? Because Asian girls are telling me that, like, that's what they expect me to date because I'm so Americanized. And I think I talked to Mike about this, but like, eventually I realized that technically the person I'm looking for when it comes to dating is someone that has just shared experience. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And technically, the most perfect thing would be like an Americanized Asian girl who understands that has this dual identity of having this Asian heritage, also has this American upbringing and shares interests that I do and stuff like that.
it's interesting what you're saying about where they are with their Asianness, because when you're meeting another Asian American person for dating, they can be at different levels, and we've talked about this levels thing. This levels concept that me and Taylor have been talking about is where they are with their grasping their Asian identity.
It's kind of similar to the fog analogy.
Yeah, exactly. The levels of where they are in the fog. Because some Asians just totally like, they're not aware that they're in the fog. They're cool with being into their Asian stuff. And that's their life. The next level after that is when we were teased like, oh, you're kind of white and you're different. So then they take a pride of that and they try to reject their Asianness. So that is like an unhealthy relationship because now you're like trying to be white, I guess.
Yeah, you're distancing yourself from it. Maybe even like self-loathing, I think, is one label that people use a lot.
And kind of putting whiteness on a pedestal.
Yeah.
What if it's like conscious or not? Yeah.
The next one, which is like this, I feel like we're on like that meme where like the head's exploding. And then the next one, transcending, you realize, it's cool if you're in that second level and you realize that you were doing that, putting Asians down, but like in the next level, you realize you were doing that, and you're like, oh, okay, like I should stop doing that. I have a well-rounded view of the whole scenario. I'm a healthy person.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I think that's like what I appreciate about the three of us is that I feel like we're within that tier where we are very aware of how Americanized we are and our point on the spectrum. And at the same time are now actively trying to be participants in the community, in our roots, and like discover that stuff. And I think like that ultimately is like the best place to be, and the most important place to be is that you're making an effort to kind of connect with your heritage and stuff like that, but like also aren't kind of rejecting this identity of like just, oh, I am an adoptee. I am fourth generation, third generation, and I have a lot of history when it comes to why I have a lot of American tastes and values. But I wanted to talk about that because I think it's also interesting that the three of us are in the entertainment industry, right? And like, do you ever feel like because of our upbringings being in like households that are more American and maybe our parents were more accepting of certain like careers and stuff like that, that allowed us the flexibility to go into this?
Yes. So I definitely have that conversation a lot with other maybe first generation or second generation Asians where it wasn't a thing that their parents probably would have accepted for them to go into entertainment or this direction. And I definitely feel like that I had more support because my parents were generally supportive of me going into that direction, which could have had to do with them being more Americanized and just living the American dream, which makes sense for the both of you too, that probably your parents were also more Americanized and open to that idea.
That's an interesting, living the American dream, yeah, because different parents have different ideas of the American dream.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, it's funny. I have conversations with first gen Asians too, where they're like, oh, how did you discuss with your parents about being an actor? Because my parents would never, go for that because they want to be, the financial fields or doctor fields and stuff. And I said, and I always say, my perspective is kind of interesting because your parents, don't know about the entertainment field. So henceforth, they're like, don't do it. We don't know what that is. That's dangerous. Do this that we do know. My parents growing up in America, they know about the entertainment field, and they know friends who've tried to do it and have struggled and are still struggling. So they had like when I brought it up, they had like hard proof and data. They're like, oh, you want to be an actor? Do you know about this person and like how their marriage? This person, he was trying to make that and then that failed. Like so, I was like, oh wow, you have data points.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's still a struggle.
So it's a different struggle. Yeah,
it's a different struggle.
It wasn't just like, Mom, you don't get it. It's like, oh, they get it. They get it. Okay.
I think like there's still all like naturally skepticism regardless of race when it comes to go into the arts, right? Because there isn't a clear path, and that's not specific to Asian for sure. But I do think like I still had an easier journey when it comes to like kind of warming my parents up to the idea of me being a filmmaker and stuff like that. So like I do acknowledge a lot often that there was a certain level of privilege that I had that allowed me to enter this field without as many hurdles or walls.
Right.
And like it was something that was difficult for me to kind of get around to accepting and say like I was like, no, it's just talent and merit, right? But like I do have to like acknowledge that like
Oh, totally.
yeah. Anyway, we could go on for hours talking about our upbringings and our experiences here, but hopefully that was insightful for y'all. I feel like this is a very like still kind of small perspective within our community that doesn't get a lot of like exposure, and I think it has a lot of relatable themes when it comes to just the Asian American experience in general.
Yeah. Do you know why it's super relatable too? Because we are going to be what your kids will be like.
Yeah. You're watching.
So watch right now, learn, study.
Yeah. Aren't you proud of us? But anyway, I just want to say thank you to Dan and Mike for being on Lunch Break again. You guys are all-star Lunch Break cast members for sure.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here. Dan, aka Dan, please follow, like, subscribe, do all those things. I got a new album coming out very soon.
Oh,
I got new music up on the Spotify. Please listen to my music. Please. Thank you.
I just did a guest spot on the new show on CW called Kung Fu, and now it's available on HBO Max.
It's on HBO
watch
Max.
that.
Watch the whole thing.
I
watch
play a
Mike's
K-pop
episode.
star, ironically.
Oh.
And watch that. And then I also am going to be making more vlogs on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/MikeBow.
And thank you to Lydia for being our +1 for today's episode. Check out our store at narastore.com. We have some new merch there. Thank you to our Patreon care holders. Subscribe, comment, let us know what you thought of this episode. And we'll see you in the next lunch break.
Bye.